Hello and happy new year, you beautiful mythical old souls, and a huge warm welcome back. How might we see grief and loss as sacred openings to transformation and growth? Well, on this week's episode, I'm joined by the wonderful Kate Barsby. Kate is a long term student and traveller of the Be Mythical path. She's also a mother of four children, a deep feeler and thinker, a soul guide, a priestess of sacred openings, and a guardian and explorer of all things which guide us towards the sacred and into the mystery. Through heartfelt stories and deep reflection, we invite you to consider the concept of sacred openings, those moments of transformation that beckon in the wake of loss, change, or transition. Kate shares her personal journey through the devastating loss of her newborn daughter, revealing how this experience became a catalyst for healing, self-discovery, and a deeper connection to the sacred. And before we jump into all of that good stuff, if you're struggling with the challenges of walking your soul path in this crazy modern world, and you would benefit from guidance, support, and kinship, come join our Academy of the Soul Unio. You can find out more and join us by hopping on over to bemythical.com/unio now, or click the link in the description. And now back to this week's episode. Let's dive in. Hello, my dear Kate. A huge welcome to the show. Welcome back to the show.
Oh, thank you, Lian. Hello.
Oh, it's such a pleasure to be doing this with you. And there's something in it that, as you know, we've had some interesting challenges with making this happen. And the timing has changed several times. And I was just feeling into it like, for whatever reason, who knows, it feels as though this was meant to be the time. And there's magic that can flow today in a way that couldn't have before. So
Yay.
I feel delighted to be
Yeah,
here.
that feels really good.
So we are going to journey through and with this symbol, this notion, this energy, this initiation of sacred openings. And I know that you have your own story of really, I guess, a sacred opening that perhaps you wouldn't have necessarily given those words to it. And yet you were aware there was something, I guess, unfolding within it that was sacred. So if you will, let's begin there.
Yeah. Thank you. Yes. Yes. So, yes, I wouldn't have called it a sacred opening, but it felt very special. So let me tell you about that. The sacred opening Lian's referring to is was the coming and going of my first daughter. And there was it was a really lovely pregnancy, a lovely labour, and then things became quite complicated and traumatic as she was born and then in the hours after. And she then needed to leave this world, and so she died. And the opening that we're referring to, and that was really so transformative, instrumental, special, grace-filled for me, was this process of her dying and then me journeying with the opening of that, which included the grief and the wonder as well. And it was a very curious time, because those things are sort of understood to be complex and traumatic and upsetting and devastating even. And I felt throughout its happening that it was meant to be happening. That was the thing that I experienced. And I could sense as it was all happening, that this was absolutely as it was meant to be, and that this was for me in some way. This was a gift. She was giving me a gift, and that the experience was a gift. And as I say, as you were saying, I wouldn't have called it a sacred opening, but I knew it was special. Yeah.
What really landed for me hearing you describe that unfolding was this knowing you had of this is meant to be happening. And I felt the power of, I've had my own experiences of that knowing, and I felt, as you said it, I felt that and the power of that in a new way. And of course, what I'm about to ask you is only really possible for you to now look back on that with your consciousness now, which is different to your consciousness then. So answer it from either place, maybe both places, both kind of what you're aware of then and now. But why do you feel, I guess there's two questions. Why did you feel this is meant to be happening? And why do you feel that made the difference that it made?
I love those questions. The first answer is, I don't know why. It simply was the way it was. I didn't ask for it to be that way. And I journeyed at the time with lots of other mums who weren't having that experience, who were having a really difficult time with the experience of losing their child. So I didn't ask for it to be that way. I didn't have any expectation it would be that way. It simply was that way. And the second question, I think, was something like, why do I think it was meant to be that way? Is that what you said?
Why do you think having this sense that it's meant to be this way, why did that have the impact it had? Like why was that in itself sort of grace filled? Why did that? I mean, I'm perhaps making a connection here that perhaps you weren't making, but my sense is there's something in that knowing it's meant to be happening that allows it to be a sacred opening.
Yeah. The word that's coming up as you say that is spaciousness. It felt like there was space around me, around the experience. There was sort of space for everything to be there. And there was no sense of trying to push bits out or disallow parts of it to be how they had to be. And I think in a way that's what made it sacred. That's what made it why it became such a special opening for me, because it meant everything was there. And what I found in the everything was love and a trust, a sense of a trust in life and in the unfolding of life, and in both the darkness and the light of life. It was all there, and it was all meant, I could just sense it was all meant to be there. Yeah, so I think that's the best I can explain it as.
Yes, it's in the, I'll see if I can put my words to what I just experienced as you described this, and I'd love to hear if this is kind of what you were seeing. It's like in the recognition of the material aspect is meant to be happening in this instance, and again I'm sort of broadening this out to other sacred openings, but in that kind of like, someone dies, in that kind of knowing this is meant to be happening, it gives this understanding that so much more is also meant to be happening, as in there's also meant to be happening this I guess evolution of my soul. What's also meant to be happening is this grief, is this love. It kind of, there is an expansive quality that comes with it. It's almost, and also I suppose is this a subconscious, like, well, if this is meant to be happening, what does that tell me about all of this?
Yes. And I guess it was the first time in my life when I'd really been set sail into it, of course, one has no control. There's no control suddenly. There's no right way to journey with something like that. There's no rule. It was like the first time when I really, that's why I talked about trusting life, because all I could do was just sort of launch myself. Well, I didn't even launch myself. I was launched into this experience. And then it was just a question of being with it. And there were times when I think I tried to manage the experience. Sometimes I think when feelings became really, really strong, you would sort of wish, why aren't I through this already? Or couldn't this be finished yet? When am I going to get on with life again? You know, all these questions just were sort of there at the edges. But the main feeling was a sense of just a sense of having to be with life. And I don't think I'd never done life like that before. And in many ways, that felt really liberating. You said the word expansive, I think, earlier, and it felt really expansive. So it also felt very vulnerable too. But I think that's where all the love floods in, doesn't it? When you become porous like that.
Yeah.
That holds you.
Yeah. I just want to, I guess, something that feels important, and you have absolutely touched on this, but it feels a really important thing to be clear about, is I know from our other conversations about that, including we did an episode kind of about this, but I think this is from a place of where you are now versus however many years ago we first had this conversation. But I know from these conversations that we've had that there was no lack of feeling in you. You know, as you know, the grief, the pain, all of that was present. And I think that's an important thing to share, because it could otherwise seem as though you were able to be with this in the way that you were because you weren't feeling those things. So I just want to ask if you wouldn't mind just sharing a little bit more about that before we start to, like, again, really look at this. What is this sacred opening that we're talking about? And, you know, all the different ways this can show up and help us journey with it. But I'd love to give you the space to share a little bit about that first.
Thank you. Yeah. Grief is such it's got such a life of its own, hasn't it? And I think as humans we can often do two things and you know, at the same time. And there was a part of me, as I said, that saw this as just this is as it's meant to be. I've been waiting for this almost. It felt like, wow, now life really begins. There was all sorts of those kinds of thoughts happening. And I remember saying some of them to my husband, and he was like, hang on a minute, Kate, are you just sort of, do you realize what's happening? Like, do you, because when I said those kinds of things, it almost sounded like I wasn't having any feelings about what was going on. And that wasn't true. It was like both things were happening at the same time. And yeah, there were some extremely dark moments. You know, when I felt like I was just at the bottom. And that was very scary at times, to feel that amount of emotion in one's system, in one's body. And you just sort of have to hang on. And I think there was a wonderful thing that the woman who helped us to organise our daughter's memorial was an amazing woman. And I remember meeting with her, and we were having a cup of tea in the garden when we were sort of in the planning phase. And she talked about grief in just this way that made so much sense to me. And I hold it dear even now. She said about how grief has to shake its way through the body. even the cells, you know. And that made so much sense to me, because that was how I experienced grief. There were moments where, yeah, it just has to shake its way through, and that's not a quick thing. There's a lot of cells for those feelings to move through. And it was meeting people like that at the time, Lian, that who didn't try to take away the pain or say it'll be gone in this amount of time. That also really allowed me to be with. They were real way markers. Way markers. They were real way showers, maybe is the way, but also way markers. These were people that had journeyed with these things and who stood there, sort of showing me the way too. Yeah, in their words.
Yeah, thank you so much. There's so much beauty in what you've just shared, and a couple of things have come to mind. One is, if I recall rightly, in our first episode, I read a passage from the prophet about joy and sorrow, and this notion that it is kind of like the depths of sorrow that we can feel is kind of forges that cup that we can then feel with joy. And as you know, I had my kind of own experience of a sacred opening upon the death of my father. And as you were just talking then, I realized that I think we can think these things almost like happen in all, like first we feel the sorrow and then the cup's there ready to feel the joy. Where my own experience of journeying through this sacred opening, I feel like yours was similar in your own way, was these things were kind of happening kind of all at once and day to day, moment to moment. And there's, as you were saying about the incredible woman that helped you with the memorial, was kind of giving you this like permission and validation and great wisdom about like, it's okay, you know, it can take years, it can take a lifetime to feel all of the grief that's here to be felt. And I was like, that's just, you know, such a helpful, like, if that's how long you need to be feeling these things, that's okay. But I was also thinking, and I know I very much, this touches on that conversation you had with your husband. I remember there were points in that first year in particular where I was kind of journeying with this like simultaneous, like massive joy and massive sorrow, where it felt like there wasn't the welcome for the joy, and that was somehow wrong. I was grieving wrong. It was inappropriate. Other people were feeling only grief, and me being kind of filled with all of this love and beauty was kind of offensive, actually. And so I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, because it feels to me a really important part of this conversation about like honoring a sacred opening is to honor like all of that.
And I think you touch on such an important thing, because almost one of the biggest challenges navigating that time was allowing other people to have their experience, and even allowing other people to have their experience of me and my grief. And I remember going to an event, let's say, a little while, a few months, probably maybe 4 months after Eliza had died, and someone asked me how I was, and I think I answered quite honestly in a this and that, both things, or whatever I said. And I think they only heard the negative bit, and they just very quickly were like, oh, well, I'm sure you'll have more children, or something like that. And
oh gosh,
it was it wasn't perhaps as cold sounding as that, but I had to really be like, okay, well, that is that's their view. That's how they might deal with something like this, to have those kinds of thoughts. And again, it was a real teaching in staying with my own experience, honoring my own experience, not feeling it should be different than it is, even though other people actually find it difficult, that perhaps I'm having the experience I'm having in whatever way that is, whether that's positive or negative in any given moment. Yeah, and again, that's what I mean about this spaciousness. It sort of taught me to allow space around each of us and our experience.
Yeah.
To give myself that grace and also others. It's challenging. It was a journey, yeah.
Yeah. What was just occurring to me is you and I have had lots of conversations. I was, I'm smiling actually. We've had lots of conversations that you and I know via the hashtag WIMM.
Okay, yeah, that one.
Would you like to share what that stands for, Kate?
I don't know if we do actually. Do we need to? Do we need to? Is it relevant?
It is just from the place. So let me give some context to this because I think that'll help. So the WIMM stands for What is My Medicine? And it's become a kind of like ongoing private joke between, now not so private, between Kate and I. And the reason this feels a really important thing to talk about is the work that we do at Be Mythical. Some of the kind of deepest work is guiding people on that journey to become their medicine. So their sacred wounds, their sacred gifts becomes this potent medicine, first for self, but then for others. And Kate is quite similar to I am in that, you know, I think part of having this makeup that allows for these very expansive experiences, there is also this kind of, I guess, sort of lack of certainty that often comes with it. I think there is just that it's part of the makeup that allows that to be the case. And so this kind of is not at all that Kate doesn't know her medicine, isn't already being her medicine, but there is a kind of ongoing kind of like, maybe there's more to be seen. Perhaps this brings in something new. The reason I'm saying this is one of the things that we've spoken about a lot in relationship to your medicine and sacred openings is when we have something that kind of feels as though it was almost just like gifted to us or we were graced with. And again, your experience in the way that you were able to journey with your sacred opening, and similar for me, the way that I was, it didn't feel like something I chose or did. You know, I was somehow able to choose something that other people aren't. It did very much just feel like this is what's unfolding for me. And the reason I'd like us to talk about this is one of the things that we've spoken about before is kind of, well, if someone isn't kind of lucky enough to have that experience of, let's say, I mean, this could, obviously a sacred opening, we'll probably talk about this a bit more. It can come in many forms. I think death is perhaps for many of us kind of the most profound, but it certainly can come in other forms too. If someone isn't having that experience of a sacred opening, then what? And then it kind of almost like gives like, why are we even talking about this? Because if someone isn't having that experience, what's the point? You know, like how can that help? But my sense is it's in having conversations like this, in, for example, that woman at the memorial who helped you with the memorial, what she said, it's these conversations where we're talking about things that aren't typically seen this way, known this way in our culture. It may be that someone doesn't have the kind of full being kind of like blown open to a sacred opening in the way that you were, and also I was, and yet it allows it to be the kind of sacred opening that's right for them. There is something that gets becomes possible. It's like the opening to the sacred opening becomes possible, perhaps through this us being able to start to have conversations of this kind. So
Mm,
It's quite a big sort of context giving, but I think this is so important because, again,
mm,
I wouldn't want people listening to this and think, well, that's not how I'm experiencing
mm,
this big thing that's happened in my life. So let's talk about this. Like, why is this the conversation to have? What can we
mm,
see? What can we illuminate that
mm,
is going to be helpful for people to journey with these big life and death initiations in a way that perhaps it becomes a sacred opening?
mm. Yeah, I really love that. And as you were talking, actually, I was thinking about a relationship breakdown. Um, I'll explain why I'm saying that, but because I think you're right. I think there's all sorts of different sacred openings, and I was sensing as you were talking, okay, what is it that makes something a sacred opening, or what is it that makes the possibility of it being that way? And for me, it's sort of how we perhaps choose to journey with something. And part of my job, actually, when I work with people who are in some form of initiation, and yes, that could be journeying with a death, it could be, as I say, journeying with a relationship breakdown. Part of my job is to invite people to consider how this could be, even though it looks devastating and it looks like destruction and it looks like death of something, a person, or as I say, a relationship, for example. What possibility is here? What actually is it possibly opening you to? And my deep love, I mean, I think for me, one of the things that to me gives life meaning and purpose is this deep exploration of ourselves and our relationship to life and our relationship to what gives us life, whatever we may want to call that, whether that's God or spirit or love or the energy behind life. For me, these moments where things appear to be breaking down and life is shifting under our feet are often an opportunity to really feel back down deep inside of ourselves and to ask the big questions about who we are and what we're doing here and what really matters to us and what we want to make the focus of the next thing that's going to grow out of this opening, because something will. And yeah, I don't know if that answers your question, Lee, but I just wanted to say that because I see the possibilities of these openings everywhere, actually.
Mm.
Yes.
I love what you've shared there. There's so much came to mind. So first, I'll share this. When you were talking about a relationship breakdown, I was
Mm,
considering that I experienced that. It was actually with a friend, and that very much was a sacred opening for me. And I think there is definitely there is a kind of imprinting that happens when we've been able to journey through something as a sacred opening. It kind of sets up this like muscle memory almost,
yeah.
where we're then much more able to journey through each thing that happens as that.
Mm-hmm.
So that came to mind, where that absolutely was a very profound sacred opening for me.
Mm,
The next thing I was thinking when you were saying that, to ask those big questions,
mm,
is there is that. And sometimes this like is when it's hardest, it's most powerful. If we can bring just even the smallest bit of curiosity
mm-hmm.
to that experience,
Mm-hmm.
that in itself is that kind of opening that allows it to be a sacred opening. Like,
Mm,
even if it's not, again, we may not have that absolute knowing this is meant to be happening, but even to have some curiosity, like, what if it is?
mm.
That for me is so much this kind of like there is it's just a tiny step, but it
Yes.
starts to that opening to happen.
Yes.
um there's something so interesting, isn't it? It's like there's an opening to a sacred opening that's so vital for the sacred opening to be sacred.
Yes, absolutely. And another one that's coming to mind is in the work I do with mothers, it is exactly what you've just said, because so often it can feel so difficult, when you're in the trenches of motherhood and everything feels difficult. it can be almost impossible to be with. And yet I notice that when that question is put to mothers with a lot of love and tenderness, because I know how difficult it can feel, but that what if this child that you're struggling with right now is in fact here to help you learn and grow and open to be more of who you are, and or just again just the what if, and just being curious about that. It doesn't have to be a yep, you're absolutely right, Kate, yep, okay, I know what I need to do now, at all. It doesn't need to be that, but it's almost like as you ask that question, a little bit of grace seeps in and becomes available.
Yeah.
Mm.
Mm. I was I realise now the synchronicity of this in hindsight. As you know, I'm almost certainly going to cry because I always do talking about this, but I lost my lovely little Dachshund Huxley earlier this year, which has turned out to be one of the most profound sacred openings I've ever experienced in the most unexpected way. And it's the sacred opening of his to keep on giving. And I was talking about this to Jonathan yesterday, and I said to him, I've actually realised that they could be that I'm never able to talk about him without crying. And that's okay. There's a reason for that if that's the case. And it was in this experience of this year, losing him very, very suddenly and kind of shockingly in a way that felt just so unfair, really took me to the places where it's like, I thought I journeyed with notions of kind of fairness and rightness, and this is meant to happen, this isn't. And, you know, should I have done this versus this? And these are all things that I thought I journeyed like with to the absolute depths. And it really has taken me to those places in a way that it required this for me to journey there, but also journey there with that kind of like the what ifs in a way that just have been such medicine for me. So painful. Again, it's like I still can't. I can barely even say his name without crying. And there is, in this conversation I was having with Jonathan, I can't recall kind of word for word, but there was just this knowing in the conversation in both of us, like, of course, it's when we are able to experience something kind of like so fully, so open to it like all the way through, because of all the other ways I've journeyed through sacred openings. I've just given myself to this. There's been no sense of he's just a dog, or we only had him for 9 months. It's just like none of that mattered. It's like this is the experience I'm having, and I'm going to allow myself to have it to the absolute fullness. And if it is a lifetime of grieving my dog that I only had for 9 months, okay, that's what it will be. And like, oh my goodness, like how much love must there be here? How much power must there be here? How much mystery must there be here for that to be that? Like, wow.
Yes.
So there is just something, again, it's like through the what ifs, there's kind of like a little opening where grace can come. And my experiences of like that, just, the more we can just be with that, like it's the not knowing, strangely, it opens us up to this magical wonder that we couldn't possibly believe lives on the other side of that.
Oh, Lee, what a wonderful companion you have in him. There was something coming to me as you were talking, and it was, it was actually about how hard this can be in the context of, the modern world that we live in. I feel there's something here around how we don't allow ourselves the fullness of experience in general. There's always rules about kind of how much is enough and how little is too
Oh
little.
my
And
gosh.
yeah. And I think it's just we've become used to not letting ourselves go all the way or journey all the way with
Mm,
experiences as they come to us in life. And I think that that's to our detriment in many ways, because things get talking about those cells and shaking grief through the cells. That the body's here to allow all experiences to come fully through. And oftentimes I think things get blocked, and
mm,
it can feel safer to keep those things blocked. And so I'm really honoring here how daunting it can be to maybe open up to this idea of journeying through something as a sacred opening, or even to begin to even possibly think about it in that way. And also how important it is to do it in the right context with the right people who can honor your
mm,
desire to experience things in that more expansive way that society will often say, well, why? Or, well, surely you can get over it now. Or, why are you so
mm.
happy when you should be feeling something else? Or, you know what I'm trying to say? Um, yeah, it's yeah. I'm just feeling how in the modern world it's hard sometimes to find those places where we can do that kind of journeying and
Mm.
feeling.
Yes. Yeah, it really is. And we're kind of beginning to come up on time. And
Mm.
what you just said there's kind of opened up this kind of whole like web of potential places to go. But um, I'll pick one, and then there's something that I absolutely want to make sure that we close with. Recently, a friend lost his father, and it's been it's been something of a, not a lesson because I knew this already, but a kind of refreshing of a lesson of how poorly we do death in our culture, particularly when it's someone else who's been bereaved. And the way they've been met and not met through this experience has been, like, in some ways quite shocking, actually. And I was brought present both to I think I've always probably had this. I don't know if it's kind of part of being autistic or it was also part of like losing my dad in the way that I did. But I've always kind of like been okay with death, if you know what I mean. Like I'm good with death, and I'm prepared to. And I think people can really shy away from this, like, oh my god, I'm going to say the wrong thing, so I just won't say anything. And
Mm-hmm.
whereas I'm like okay with, I may get it wrong. It may be upsetting for them to talk about it, but I'm here and I'm like, okay with whatever is going to
Mm-hmm.
unfold in this space. I'm here for that person and we'll journey with this however it's meant to go.
Mm.
And but it's been really interesting kind of witnessing how that isn't the case for most people, again just through their own fear. It's not them being bad people or not caring. They just don't know
Mm.
how to be there for someone who has lost someone.
Mm-hmm.
And that was just something I was just like, yes, like at the very basic level, there is this, there is a way of journeying with these big life initiations in the way we're talking about, but kind of at the most basic level, culturally, we struggle to just like be with it, even in a kind of just like fairly basic way. um and so coming back to what you were saying, the reason I was thinking all of this is like what you were saying, like being with the right people, like being held in that
Mm-hmm.
way by the type of people who can go to those places. My goodness, it's essential,
Mm-hmm.
particularly if we want to have some sense of different kind of experience than our culture says is possible.
Yes. Yes. I was thinking as you're talking how these things like death and, I don't know, as I said before, a relationship breakdown or a mother maybe struggling with mothering, they're seen by society as so inconvenient in terms of we just want to get
Mm,
on and progress. And, we've got obsessed with this idea of where we're going next.
mm,
And it's so, I mean, this is why I do the work I do, because to me, to see those experiences as the point of life in them, in and of themselves,
mm.
to fully honor. You know, why do we say that bit's not relevant
Mm,
and that bit is relevant? My goodness, you know, that to me is
mm,
everything. To honor it all, even the things that seem inconvenient or difficult, or we don't know
mm.
what to say, or yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So again, I really wanted to make sure we had this conversation before we close on this episode. And I feel as though, even though it's not everyone listening to this episode is going to sort of end up with you, working with you,
Mm,
I still feel that what I'm about to ask you, there's something in what's going to unfold that's going to be um, useful in some way to everyone listening. So just
mm,
recognize this. Don't feel that you need to sort of do anything more than just answer the question, because I feel there's going to be medicine in how you answer this.
mhm,
So if you are sitting with someone who is experiencing a sacred opening, and perhaps the most sort of, again, the most profound kind, where there has been very a painful
mm,
bereavement they've experienced,
mm.
what do you see is the work there? What are you doing with that person and why?
Mm. Witnessing is the word that comes up first. Mm. Holding space around them so that they can, like intentional space for them to journey with their experience in whatever way feels relevant and right to them. And I tell you, that can be so many different ways, you know. And really, I see myself as a companion with them, like allowing or again, because we're not used to this. Sometimes you have to sort of almost encourage people, draw out of them what feels right to them to do in this moment, in order to
Mm,
help them do the next piece of journeying with this experience. And so it might be that I even suggest something, or invite them to really, perhaps for the first time, honor what feels right to them, even though that might seem odd to mainstream society, or feel possibly frightening to them to fully express themselves. So yeah, my deepest desire is that when people sit with me, they feel they can be whoever they are in that moment, and they can express themselves and say whatever they want to say, and I will
mm,
not judge or be shocked or wish it wasn't the way it was. Because I think, like you were saying about your capacity, Lian, I can sort of be with a lot, and it's not that it doesn't impact me, it's not that I don't hear it fully, but it doesn't damage me. And I think to sit with someone who you know you can't damage through your words and your feelings,
mm,
and is very, it, yeah, I've had people do that for me, and it's extremely, extremely healing, uh, yeah, experience to have.
mm. What was really occurring to me listening to what you're saying is the way that there's it's a bit like kind of sacred openings all the way down, as in there is
Mm,
there's a kind of recognition that these life initiations can be sacred openings, as in the opening itself is sacred. There's something sacred in the opening, but it also is opening us to the sacred,
mm,
um, in that it's it's opening us, like you said earlier, to ask the big questions, to see things we otherwise wouldn't have seen, to
mm,
perhaps um, open to a relationship with spiritual matters that
mm,
perhaps the person hasn't either has left behind, from a religion they were raised in, or perhaps for the first time really recognize like there is more to life than the things I can, taste, touch, see, feel, hear.
mm,
um there's so much that and again, that was very much my experience. I was thrust into an experience of life through my father dying that was it was a reality that was just entirely different to the one I inhabited before.
Mm.
And that there is the gift, isn't it? Really, there is the kind of gift of recognizing this could be a sacred opening, but it's like, and then, oh my goodness, it opens us to the sacred,
Mm.
to relating to everything, ourselves, life as sacred.
Mm. Mm. Yes. Yeah. You know, the biggest gift of these openings is that they bring us closer to ourselves. They connect us to ourselves, and it's in the deepening of that, because we have to journey. We can't avoid journeying with ourselves in these moments. You're right. We're connected to all that is. Well, we realise that there is no disconnect between us and all that is. Yeah. Mm.
Is there anything that you would like to say before we close?
Mm. A deep reverence I'm feeling for how all of life is sacred, and yet so easy for us to forget that as humans. And that's where these openings offer us a chance to remember. Yeah, I think that's all I have to say, I think.
Yeah.
Mm.
Grief and praise, as our beloved
Absolutely.
Martine Brechtel says.
Yes.
Yes.
Oh,
Yes.
yeah.
So, my dear, where can people find out more about you and how you serve your medicine?
Oh, thank you, Lian. Well, unsurprisingly, my website's called sacredopenings.com. So people can find me there. I'm a little bit on Instagram, again, Sacred Openings. And Sacred Openings is really the portal through which I do my one-to-one work with people who are experiencing a rupture in their lives, as I say, whether that's an actual bereavement or a relationship that's dramatically changing, and they're wanting to use that as a sacred opening. And I also work a lot with mothers, partly because I'm a mother myself, and motherhood has been its own big initiation for me. It continues to be a big initiation for me. And I've joined forces with the wonderful Janet Hill, and we've created something called the Cherished Mother, which is where we do most of our sort of joint. We work together with mothers in that portal, in that space. And that is really giving women a space where they can receive some well-needed love and balm, but also supporting them to really do the deep work of seeing what motherhood may be showing them about themselves, and supporting them to really become intimate with their inner landscape so that they can parent in the way that they long to on the outside. And that's cherishedmother.com.
Thank you for sharing. I just had this moment of like, oh, it's just so magical how things unfold. I just had this remembrance that you and Janet both joined us for medicine back in 21, I think it was, which is I guess where that sort of like coming together and starting to realize how beautifully placed you are to serve your medicine together. And I just had this moment of like, oh, it's been such a pleasure to be part of and to witness both of your journeys in becoming your medicine, but then also that coming together, like it's one of my favorite things ever.
Yes.
And I just had this moment of like, oh, this, yes, it's been certainly one of my favorite journeys to have been part of.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
incredible work you both do. So Thank you so much, Kate. This has just been such a as all our conversations are actually, but yeah, a really beautiful, deep, rich, joyous, all of the things conversation. Thank you.
Thank you too.